wooden forts before this, starting in and around 1720. This fort was essentially completed between 1753 and 1756. Although I have seen a document, or a copy of a document, that from a British officer that got here on October 10th, 1765, which we all know all about that, and he wrote that when he got here that the fort was not complete by 1765, and that there were several areas that simply weren't done. So they had been working on this fort for a number of years, 12 or years or so. They probably got it to a point of living in it by 56. That's what we assume. But we are inside of a French fort, and as I tell students, you have to use your imagination. You have to be able to visualize things. For example, there was a 15-foot high, 3-foot thick stone wall all the way around the fort. The fort was a square fort with 4 bastions, and the fort is built on the compass points. So that bastion over there points due north, or at least, you know, on the compass due north, and then you can go from there. The French basically used labels for the fort as if it was setting north, south, east, and west. For example, we'll get over there in a minute, but they call that barracks over there. It's even listed in the Pro Saber Bio that it's the East Barracks, and that is the West Barracks. Although we know that that's not exactly quite right, but that's just, you know, that's the north wall, that's the south wall. But that's the way the French designated the place. So there was a 15-foot high wall all the way around, and we'll step outside here in a minute and we'll make our way around. But the building that we're in right now is the guard's house. And although through the years, a lot of reenactors have affectionately called it the barracks. No, this was not a barracks, never was a barracks. This was a guard's house. This room was the guard's room, and that's what gives the building its name. And the guards had separate hours and separate duties. They were pulled from the ranks of the men, and then they would serve as on guard duty, and they would be in this building. Normally, and I don't do this too often, but normally you have to really visualize, there was a big communal bed right here. But I understand it was removed probably because of some press thing or when they had a whole lot of people in here. And we do remove it I keep saying we, although I don't have any problem with that anymore. But the folks, David removes the bed occasionally for special events if they need a place where there's more room. And you all have been here, you've all seen the communal bed. For whatever reason, in most French or British forts, in the guardhouse, they would have a communal bed. Now, in the other rooms, they would use, you know, small wooden bunk beds or small wooden beds for the men. But for some reason, you can go to, you would name off any different forts, and they'll have a written description about the communal bed in the guard room, and we also do here at this fort. So, howdy, how you doing? So, and this was the guards room where the guards lived and when they were off duty. And then I should say, and I'll say a little bit of this as we go along. This building was rebuilt in 1936, and it may have used CCC money. It was not a CCC project, but it definitely had CCC influence. When you look at the beams and you look at the doors and the windows, how big they are and everything, it kind of gives you that feeling of being in a CCC lodge somewhere that was built about the same time. But I've seen the paper clipping that this was built by a company contractor out of Herrin, Illinois, And there was an article written in the paper when that contractor locally down there got the award, because it was a big deal. He got this in 36. It was kind of a big deal to get this kind of a state contract. I still think there was CCC money spent on it. I kind of get the feeling that there actually were some CCC, maybe even influenced architects when they drew the building up. But it was rebuilt in 36 on the original foundation. When we go outside, we'll talk a little bit about the progression here of what happened at Fort Deschartres, the stone Fort Deschartres, after the French abandoned it and on up rather quickly, but on up through basically now. But in fact, what we'll do, and anytime you have a question, just hold your hand up. And if you want to know where the fort is, let me know early. Don't wait till we get done. But no, if you have any questions, say, hey, Daryl, what about this? I also normally on a tour, or I have in the past, not pointed out things that are not quite right. Just because, the folks don't want to come here and hear, well, this is wrong and this is wrong. Because this building, again, was built in 36. We love this building, and here there again I say we. Well, we all do, because we get to use it. I'm sure everyone, maybe a few exceptions, have actually spent the night in this particular room and in this building. But when you look at things and you think about things, I question a couple things. I question the stone floor. It doesn't appear that any of the buildings had stone floors, and this building is really copied after a building at Fort Niagara with the stone floor and with some other influences. I question the 9-foot door. You don't really need a 9-foot door. The French, they weren't giants. But they weren't real little either. The whole perception that they were 5'2", and everybody's is like Steve Anderson was the perfect French Marine. and no disrespect, I think he's 5'4" now after he has knees operated on it. He gained a few inches. But here at the fort, there was a biographical sketch made of, I believe, 6 individuals, and their heights were given, their beard colors were given, everything about them. It's a great little document because it happened. I mean, it's from right here. But they were all 5'3", 5'4", 5'5", maybe 5'2", 5'3", 5'4", but that's French inches. So in English inches, they actually were 5'6", 5'7", in that range. So they weren't, but anyhow, that's the way things go. I question the stone floor. I question the doors, some of the metalwork on the windows. And again, I'll say one more thing about the doors. My wife and I, in 1998, Tammy and I were very fortunate to travel in France. We were doing some reenacting in France, and it was just absolutely outstanding. That's a whole, I could talk for an hour on that, but I won't. But we visited several original historic sites in the south of France along the coast, and they would have doors about this big. It would be a regular, normal. Man, it might be a little bit taller, but again, I don't want to poo-poo this building too much, because we're just very happy that it's here. They didn't have to build it, and they tried to get, and they did get the rooms right. The rooms are laid out exactly as it is in the Procès-Verbal. And I mentioned that a few times. Some of you may be familiar with that, but when the British took the fort over on October 10th in 1765, the British made a copy, the French made a copy, and it's the verbal process of the transition of the fort, or whatever. What was the other name? It's a verbal process. They actually had a title for it, but it's just simply called. We always call it verbet, the process verbet. It was the description of the fort what the British were getting and what the French were leaving, which don't always coincide, which is also kind of cool, you know. The British were saying, you know, we gave you 6 great tables in this room, or 4 great tables, and the British are going, you know, 4 bad tables. You know, that's kind of how it went. But at any rate, unless you have any questions about this, let's step up. Yeah.
I do have one question. You mentioned you don't think the floors would have been stone. Would they have been wood or just dirt?
Oh, I believe they would have been wood, because the foundations of the buildings that were exposed and dug up, they do have a place for wood. Would make sense. Now, when we step outside here in the shade, I'll talk about the building next door, and I have some. Through the years, I've had some questions about that building. Having been in a couple warehouses, actual storehouses, and at other historic sites. But then again, it could be totally wrong, my perspective of that building next door. But I do also want to say this. I have to apologize because today I'm completely undressed. I'm dressed partially, or actually as a French Marine, but like I say, I am completely undressed, and my sergeant is not here, and we're yet, and don't, oh, there you are, don't say a word. But I am, and you've all, you know, if you have any questions about the uniform, I'll be happy to answer them also, but I'm in more clothes.
Small clothes.
Yeah.
You know, one of Nick's pet peeves and questions is, would this have been painted, the ceiling been painted white?
Well, I don't know if it would have been. It could have been. It could have been whitewashed with the rest of it. Possibly, you know, whitewash is not too difficult to make if you have access to lime. And we know we have lime mortar, we have limestone, and you got to give these guys something to do. So you know, there's every chance. Now I thought you were going to say is the number of beams.
No,
Because
I just always thought that it'd have a white ceiling because of the fact that it reflects more light, so.
Well, yeah, and folks who study about that stuff with the whitewashing and everything, say there's also health benefits. If you keep things whitewashed and clean, there's some kind of a sanitizing thing with the whitewash. So yeah, you're probably right. My thing was, I didn't bring it up, is that, you know, it's all hard work, and it all literally costs money. But the beams are like, along with the doors, the beams are way like overkill, you know.
Well, all of the 400,000 tons of wheat were all stored upstairs, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Hey, Darrell,
Yeah.
did they have any idea or documents indicating how many stonemasons and carpenters they had here to build this thing?
Yeah, I don't have it on top of my head, but we have a pretty good list of stonemasons, and we have a pretty good list of what their marks were. And having said that, that also brings up, you know, the whole place fell into ruins, and we were just talking about that a couple days ago with Pete Harbison, that I've often wondered where all the stone went, and you know, some was carried away. There, and I have to admit, I've never laid eyes on it, but has been reported there are house foundations in town that have mason's marks that were from the fort, that we know were taken from stone from this fort and used in the foundations. I need to talk to Margaret sometime and actually go with her and look at that, because that's kind of cool. For what we know, the stone was never used in the Eads Bridge. That's just not where they got that, but they say that every year. But if you look at the Eads Bridge, it's got great big
Granite.
stones in it. And it was a whole lot easier to get stone up that way than it was to come all the way down here and haul off, scraps. Because this building is really good, and really a good example of how the fort was built in its entirety. The stone around the doors and the windows is dressed, and then the other stone is laid, and they did use lime mortar. Now the other thing we talked about the other day and I've always had this question, is where did the stone actually come from? You know, when people ask us, and I know David does this, David picked this up from me, when folks say, where did the stone come from? We just kind of point that way. You know? I know where there's some lime kilns, and they are original lime kilns. They may not be there for many years you can even see it because they've been cut through by the highway department. But I know where, I used to be able to find 3 of them, or we did, because they were shown to me. I can only see 2 of them now, but they're historic period lime kilns where they burnt the lime to make the lime mortar. And so you can assume that very near the lime kilns is where the lime was quarried. I think it would be cool, and this may be a project someday for AME, is whoever owns that property, and I'm not even sure, and it would be hard to dig there, but if you get an archaeological dig there, because they worked there for X number of years, and you know, they quarried the stone and they burnt it there, and you know, the guys are hanging around and buckles and buttons are falling off of them, and they're breaking an axe handle or breaking a pickaxe handle and throwing it down, you know, I just think it'd be, and it's never been messed with, so I think there'd be great archaeological evidence there. But I have never seen on the bluff where the stone actually came from, and I think Margaret Brown knows, and I need to get with her at some point. I would love to, and just go up there and she could point out, because every time I drive by there, you know, I try to avoid, like, you know, having a wreck, but I'm always looking, and I'm trying to visualize what it looked like, because when you consider inside this, with a fort with 15-foot walls, 3 foot thick all the way around it, and counting the gatehouses, there's 11 buildings. Excuse me, there's 11 buildings inside the fort. Now, that's a lot of rock. They